In the last movie, we looked at how we could create a basic path with the pen tool. In this movie, what we want to do is look at how we can create a more complicated path. And we're going to start off by taking a look at this third artboard up here in the top right-hand corner. I'm just going to go ahead and zoom into it. One thing that you may want to do is come over to the Layers panel, and inside the Layers panel, you want to lock the info layer. The info layer contains all the instructions that I typed out into this document. It's a good idea to work with this document outside of this video to practice with the pen tool. We'll walk through a couple of examples together, but like I said, it is important to practice on your own to get comfortable with this tool. So after locking the info layer, we're ready to come over and create more complicated paths. In the last example, what we were doing is choosing the pen tool and clicking to create something called a corner point. And a corner point did nothing more than allow you to establish a straight line from that point. But of course, what we want to do here is control the direction of the anchor point. And when you control the direction of an anchor point, you're creating a smooth point. So in this case, to create this ellipse, what you need to do is click, but you need to drag as well. So it's one motion. Click, hold down the mouse, and drag to this red dot, which is marked number 2. So that creates this anchor point, but it's also controlling the direction of the anchor point. By dragging it out to the right, you're asking this anchor point, when connected to another anchor point, to have the path move out towards the right. If I come over here and click on 3, I'm still holding down the mouse button, you can see that the path is moving towards the right, but it quickly has to make a turn so it can connect to this anchor point down here that we just established. Now, obviously, we're not getting the arc that we really want, so what we need to do is continue to bend that path, and we can do that by dragging out here towards the left. Not only are we bending the arc between these two newly established anchor points, but we're also setting up the direction for this anchor point as the path continues. If I come over to 1, you'll notice I get a little circle indicating that I'm going to create a closed path. If I click, I get that arc, but I also want to drag so I can complete this ellipse. So by clicking and dragging, you have the ability to control the direction of the anchor point. You probably wouldn't use the pen tool to create an ellipse. You would probably use the ellipse tool to do that. But the idea here is that you're beginning to understand that you can control the direction of these anchor points. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. I'm going to hold down the space bar to move over to this middle artboard here. You also want to make sure that you don't have anything selected and your pen tool has a little star or X next to it, which is an indicator that you're going to create a new path. All we have to do here is click, in this case on 1, and drag up. By dragging up, you're establishing the direction of the anchor point to move the path in an upward motion. So now if we click over here on 3, the path does start off in an upward motion, but it quickly has to shoot down to connect to that new anchor point. So we want to control the direction of this now. We want this anchor point to move in a downwards motion, because as you can see from the finished example or the guide that you're seeing, the next arc needs to essentially arc down. So if we click and drag down, not only do we establish that this anchor point will move the path in a downward motion, it'll also pull the path that's being drawn between 1 and 2. It's pulling the right side down, which is ultimately creating an arc that arcs up. So hopefully that makes sense. As you continue to create this path, you'll see that exact effect take place over and over and over again. So this anchor point is moving in a downwards motion, but it can't move downward completely if we come over to 5, so it'll move downward a little bit and then kind of shoot across and connect to 5. But if we click and drag up, we'll pull down the rest of this path and we'll establish the direction of the next segment of the path in an upwards motion. So if I click and drag up, you can see that that's the case. And that's all we're doing in this example. So we're controlling the direction of each of these anchor points. And ultimately, you can create kind of this squiggly line. So I'll go ahead and click and drag and complete the path. I'm going to press the V key on the keyboard to click away from it to deselect it. What we're looking at here are something called smooth points. As I said, smooth points give you the ability to control the direction of the anchor point. However, you may run into situations where you need an anchor point to behave much like a smooth point, but also have characteristics of a corner point. That type of anchor point exists inside of Illustrator. It's called a combination anchor point. If we hold down the space bar and move down to the artboard in the lower left corner, we can take a look at working with a combination anchor point. Come over and choose the pen tool. You'll notice that we have a similar path, but all of these arcs arc down. So we do need to control the direction of the anchor point so we can connect and create that arc. But after pulling an anchor point in a certain direction to get it to arc down, we don't want the anchor point to start the path off in the opposite direction, which would be moving up. We want it to continue to move down. So let's take a look at how we can do this. We want to come over and click on 1 and drag down to 2, just like we did before. Then we want to come over to 3, click and drag up, just like we did before. Except now, if we were to continue clicking, the next anchor point would move in an upwards motion, and we don't want that to happen. We want it to move in a downwards motion. So if you hold down the Alt key, or the Option key on the Mac, you'll notice you get what looks like an upside down V, I suppose. If you click and drag down, you're changing the direction of the anchor point. So we were able to click and drag up to get the arc to appear the way that we wanted it to, but by holding down the Alt or the Option key, we're rechanging the direction of the anchor point to move in a downward motion still. So if I click over here to 6 and drag up to 7, you can see I get that arc to move in a downward motion. Hold down the Alt or Option key, click and drag down to redirect that anchor point in the opposite direction. So hopefully that makes sense. So we've looked at smooth anchor points and combination anchor points that ultimately give us the ability to create more complex paths inside of Illustrator.